Thank you. We had a demographic story, we had the European story, the political side of it. We had all the statistics from here, and mind you, are still your notes, because we don't have those numbers. Those are very valuable. You either give a copy to us or I'll still yeah. Okay. Thank you very much.
Everything is recorded on YouTube, so.
Very good, very good, very good. So I'll give you a slightly different story, the economic story. Now the topic of this conference and this now what we have is demography, migration, nexus. As an economist, of course, we include demography indirectly. Demography feeds in through employment, unemployment, production, employment versus unemployment. Demography doesn't come in as a force through congestion or something like that. What we had done in 2004 was to try to emulate, to do the same study as the Commission report of 2003, and we looked at different, of course, formulations of what drives Turks out, or what pulls Turks to Germany, better said. And there, this seemingly complicated story only says that wages are very important and generally proxied by income level, per capita income. And then employment in the two countries is important. The number of immigrants from the country is important because they constitute some sort of a base. Now, what do we do to emulate this story is the following. We have had very many versions, scenarios. I'll be simplifying these stories to cut it short. One version was looking at the cohesion countries, or immigration from cohesion countries into the EU. And there are two episodes actually. One is during the late 60s and early 70s of guest workers, not only from Turkey, but from all these countries, Greece, Portugal, Spain, and Yugoslavia, and so on, but that complicates the story. So there, as the guest workers, as the doors were open for guest workers, there is a rush of Greeks, Portuguese, Spaniards, and Turks. And after that while, as things mature, especially as these so-called cohesion countries mature and they get richer, they are also right to become members. And then when they become members, after some 5, 6 years or 7 years or so, there's free movement of labor. Now what we see here is not migration numbers, but as what is that? Migrants in Germany as percentage of source country population. And Germany is about 80% of everything in this matter. So with good German statistics, we can get a good picture of what's happening in Europe. So what you see here is that there's a major increase in immigration, measured one way or the other. And then as these countries become ripe, so to speak, although they are now members and there's free movement of labor, there is not much outflow. So we do exactly the same type of analysis, first estimating those parameters and so on, and applying it to Turkey. Now, where does demography come in? I underline only this part of the story, because we are in a conference titled Demography, Nexus. What we have is, as there is a demographic projection, we take it exogenously, but what we endogenize is internal migration and employment and unemployment in the urban sector, and that's found to be the driving force in migration. Now, let's look at this story. There's a pretty sophisticated model, but takes many things exogenously, so not so sophisticated from that point of view. It only looks into this Aristotle type of internal migration movements. What do people expect to find in the cities is a function of the income level differential and the chances of getting a job, which is determined by the unemployment rate in the cities and so on. So, Turkey's unemployment rate, this was our projection in our 2004 story, with given GDP growth of 6.5%, with agricultural GDP growth or agricultural growth of 2%, and a certain productivity growth and so on. Unemployment was supposed to go up a little bit, and then by 2030, approach to about 5%. This is our basic scenario with high growth. Assumptions for EU, we had 2% annual growth for EU, and we had the prevailing unemployment rates, and EU average at that point was about 7–8% or so. And projections, we wanted to see what would happen if Turkey became a member and free labor mobility was introduced in 2015. Alternatively, we looked at what would have happened, because as our speaker Gais has mentioned, that the borders are very porous. Even if you don't have that kind of free mobility of labor, still people somewhat manage to go in and out both ways. So we also emulated the guest worker episode. Put differently, we also estimated the parameters using the guest worker episode as sort of a free labor mobility, in the absence of free labor mobility. The difference between the two is that when there is free labor mobility, that implies that the countries are somewhat prepared, are ripe, so that there is no expectation of a huge movement of people. Whereas in the guest worker episode, as we have had in Turkey, but not only in Turkey, with Greece, Spain, Portugal, and so on, there is not that kind of a harmonization, and there is more pull factors because the gap is much greater. So you expect from the guest worker episode to have a bigger number of immigration. Now, this is the blue line is the stock, the orange line is the net change in the stock or the flow, to give you just an idea, but I'll get to the numbers. The numbers are such that, again, out of many scenarios, I'm reporting some. Some of them are not fully comparable, but I couldn't find a better way of doing it, so this is what I have. The scenario 3. We have by year 2030 a total of about 1 million Turks migrating to EU. If the unemployment in the EU is lower than that 8% benchmark and so on, we would add another 100,000 Turks. If we do the same story with the guest worker scenario, Turkey is not a member of the EU, but somewhat because of this porous nature of the borders, Turks are moving in, and we get that also implies that all kinds of harmonization between Turkey and EU are non-existent. We get something a higher figure. That's quite understandable. Now, if the negotiations are broken down and so on, and Turkey does not get the anchor from the EU, what happens to Turkish growth? We assume that we then move to a low growth scenario in Turkey, and at that low growth scenario with higher unemployment and so on, the figures would jump up to about 2.7 million. So the story we wanted to convey there first, number one, under normal circumstances, if Turkey becomes a member, that means that we have converged a long way to the EU averages. Number two, if Turkey doesn't become a member, although there is the great, despite the great effort of the EU countries to close their borders, there would probably be more Turkish emigrants moving from Turkey getting into EU. Now, when we were doing that, we couldn't factor in the aging of the Turkish population in our main scenarios. We made a back of the envelope sort of calculation, and we think that because the elderly people are less inclined to migrate, this figure, and as the Turkish population is aging, the estimations above can be downgraded, scaled down by 300,000 in the total between 2004 and 2030. Now, what is the current situation? This is, of course, became very minute compared to my colleague's presentation, but what we get from different sources, especially reported in Karim by Ahmet İşgüldü, we understand that there is very little asylum. The family formation, I didn't have an idea, and I'm learning that it is not plus minus, it's very much minus. Illegal migration from Ahmet, apprehensions are down, so there's a reduction. There's increase in professionals, but these are in terms of a couple of thousands, and again contract labor. So overall, I didn't have this figure of 28. When we wrote this paper, that number was on the gross about 70,000. Now it's about 28 or something. So from that point of view, our estimations aren't much off the benchmark, because there we also have 2004 to 2015 estimations. Now, we didn't update the paper, given that our expectations haven't changed very much. It won't make a paper or a book. So, but I'll just show a couple of diagrams telling you that the current situation, state of the things, have not a direct important impact on our projections. Demography, growth and employment. Now, basic demographic projections we have had at that point was this when we started off. These are the median ages. The median age was 27, 33, and 38. It would be in 2050. Now, these are the new projections, and there's not much difference with the new projections, except that we have had, of course, much better statistics on demography by our first speaker in this session. Now, the population is expected to age a little bit more, and that pulls down the forecast even a little bit further down. Now, this population forecast, again, we have had much better statistics, so I wasn't expecting that, but I didn't know, of course, that there would be a presentation particularly on demography. As such, we know this story, so it peaks around 90 million. This is the base scenario. These are cut and paste directly from the Statistical Office webpage. People there, of course, are professionals, so they have a decent scenario about total fertility and so on, which gives us this story. But again, after all, they don't want to be fired, so they also put in those scenarios with 3% total fertility rates and so on, which of course generate a population of 120 million, but that's fortunately not true, because as far as I'm concerned as an economist, is not what is important is per capita income rather than the total size of the economy. It's true that if we can increase total fertility, it will be easier for Turkey to be the 10th biggest economy in the world, but what matters is on a per capita basis whether Turkey will be among the first 30 countries in terms of per capita income or not, rather than the 10th country. But it's true, strategically speaking, the world is not only, the stories are not only economic stories, so the strength of the economy as such, the absolute size of the economy also matters. So I'm not completely writing off that story, but the per capita story is of course much more important. Now I'm skipping over this very rapidly. This is again cut and paste from the Statistical Office webpage. What we have, we can look at the basic scenario, scenario number 1, and there we look at the proportion of 65-year and older population. Goes from 7% to 10% to 20% and 27%. Again, these are pretty much in line with the projections that were available when we initially made our projections. So our argument is not very much off the bar. This is what I want to say. Now, what's going to happen? What's going to happen in the future concerning the economic drivers? The economic drivers, Turkey has had this 2001 terrible crisis, and this was something of accumulated mismanagement of the economy. Turkish economy is essentially much better managed since then, and the banking system and everything, as you know, are pretty much restructured. There are still major structural problems in the economy, but nevertheless, it's a different ballgame. So now you see in 2009 a dip in the Turkish economy about the size of 4.8 or something, and a similar dip in EU economy. So we will, in future crises, most likely, there might be again similar crises in the starting figures in the euro area or in the United States or somewhere else, but most likely we will move together rather than Turkey living its own silly crises because of its total mismanagement of its economy. So under those circumstances, I think that there already was, there's a historical per capita GDP growth of Turkey about 4%, 4.2 or something like that. This is a long-standing trend, and that is 1 or 2 percentage points over industrial countries, and that probably gap, that differential will somewhat increase. Hopefully, of course, Europe will get out of this crisis because it also pulls everyone back, not only for altruistic reasons, but also for egoistical reasons. We want Europe and the United States to be out of the crisis as soon as possible. But nevertheless, we'll have a 2-3% positive differential. So that is, again, putting in terms of our projections, Turkey is converging to the European levels, slowly but steadily converging. So that's good news. What is Turkey heading for? Is trying to have this 5 times 5 times 5, or 5-5-5. We have things 4-4-4 in education, 5-5-5 in growth. What is 5-5-5 in growth? 5% growth, 5% inflation, and 5% current account deficit. Because current account deficit is the soft belly of Turkey, is the bottleneck, or put differently. Yeah? So presume, is it attainable? It might be attainable. 5% growth over the medium term, longer term is attainable. Is that enough for unemployment, for keeping unemployment at bay? It may. Unemployment is a more tricky thing because it depends, as you well know, very much also on the labor participation rates. So Turkey presumably has a similar unemployment currently, like 10% or 8 plus or whatever, doesn't matter. It's roughly the same unemployment rate as EU average, or the Eurozone average for that matter. They are pretty close to each other. But in fact, labor participation rate in Turkey is about 50%, whereas that rate is in the 60% plus in EU. So it makes a lot of difference. Here, of course, we talk a little bit about gender differences and so on. This about 50% labor participation comes from about 75% of male labor participation, and 28 or 26% also is increasing. It has increased a couple of percentage points of female participation, which is very, very low. Now, if that participation increases, which it should, we hope it will, because I think the best indicator of modernization is female labor participation. I think it should, I think it will, but that is also additional pressure on the labor market. Now, if you have a sufficiently high growth rate, of course, the causality goes both ways. And if you have better education among women, that's, you create more jobs and so on the one hand, but at the same time, it's a supply. More women on the labor market puts more pressure. So how you manage it? How you manage it, how you manage your technology, how you manage everything, how you improve your structure, the structure of the economy to observe that and turn that into an opportunity rather than a liability. Of course, it's very important. So on the unemployment front, it's more difficult to make forecasts, but at least we can say that if we look at the trends only, now they have approached somewhat. They will be in close vicinity most likely. It will be difficult for Turkey to pull that rate to 5% and so. It may take another 10, 20 years and so on, assuming that labor participation rates will be increasing. With constant labor participation rates, yes, Turkey will certainly push it down, and the democracy works in our advantage in that sense that the increase in population is not, or the working force is not increasing at the same rate, so that's a quote-unquote plus from the point of view of unemployment. But that's the story here. Thank you.